Today we're talking about Napoleon III and how Gallic identity blossomed because of his excavations involving the Battle of Alesia. My name is Moray. I am a real woman, not an avatar, creating anti-AI generated history content. And yeah, let's talk about Napoleon III. Charles Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. He was born on April the 20th, 1808 in Paris, and he established a new trajectory for the Bonaparte dynasty. He was the third son of Louis Bonaparte, the King of Holland, and Empress Josephine's daughter. And it's quite weird ancestry. And the step-grandson, Napoleon I, the famous Napoleon. His early life was based in the First Empire. At his baptism, his very famous uncle was there. And at the Place du Carousel, when Napoleon III was 7, his uncle held him up to see the military grandeur that was happening. 50,000 soldiers. Let's talk about Napoleon III's schooling. So Napoleon I was very into history. As we know, to Napoleon I, history wasn't just a collection of dates, but a real way that one could learn about their heritage, and claimed it was the only true philosophy. The curriculum of the First Empire. Education was transformed from being an education to a tool of state building. Napoleon I established the University of France and wanted to create a modern uniform curriculum. There was military style discipline, and obviously Napoleon I wanted the sons of the middle class, a nobility of talent. And the history education, let's talk about the history education. It was based on great men. Napoleon I was fascinated by living archaeology of places like Egypt and the Roman legacies of Julius Caesar. The 1798 Egyptian expedition, as they called it, an expedition, but really it was a thieving contest. The Rosetta Stone was, how do we say, was it taken, was it gifted? How do we say it politely? Napoleon I was really into Egyptology, and even during Napoleon I's exile in St. Helena, he wrote this piece of work that compared his military career to Julius Caesar's. The First Empire falls in 1815, and the Bonaparte family are in exile, so they go to Switzerland, and therefore Napoleon III has a Swiss education. This was not the military education that his uncle wanted. He's raised to be an heir to the throne. In his day-to-day life, he had to become a German-speaking Swiss citizen, and he attends the local school and the gymnasium in Bavaria, and whilst he always held his French education, he kept a German accent. He learns about German philosophers. His private tutor at home is Philippe Lebas, a French revolutionary and an associate of Robespierre, French Revolution. Lebas is a prominent Republican, and whilst Napoleon III's family have this very imperial mindset, Louis Napoleon III was learning all about republicanism. So we have German philosophy, French republicanism, and Napoleonic romanticism. It's quite a contrast of views that the young Louis Napoleon, completed his training in Swiss military school. He specializes in artillery, becomes a captain in the Swiss army. At the time, there was a centuries-old debate. Since the 18th century, French history has been taught through two competing lenses, right? So it's kind of like Hamni, who's, Cymru Dewey. I grew up in Wales, and we learned all about the Romans versus the Celts, and we only learned a tiny bit about British colonialization, but mostly we learned about the Romans and the Celts. France, since the early 18th century, France had been having two social myths, the Frankish myth and the Gallic myth, right? No, the Frankish myth meant that French nobility were the descendants of the Germanic Franks, and therefore they were like the rightful rights to the throne, the rightful heirs to the throne. The Franks conquered Gaul in the 5th century, and under this theory, it was the theory of just conquest. Justify the aristocracy's taxes and rule over people. The common people are viewed as the conquered Gallo-Romans, right? And the historical bias for this claim is the unification of Gaul under Clovis I. For those who supported the Bourbon Restoration, 1815 to 1830, the Frankish myth served as a defense to traditional hierarchy and the divine right of kings. The Franks are portrayed as freedom-loving German elite, but in opposition to the Frankish myth, you have the revolutionaries of 1789, quite liberal historians, Augustin Thierry, promoted the Gallic myth. They argued that the Third Estate were the true heirs to the indigenous Gauls, and they claimed that there was a long overdue response to the Frankish conquest. And the Gauls represented the resilience. Louis Napoleon, he saw these two kind of competing ideas. Let's talk about the challenge to the July monarchy. It was led by Louis Philippe of the House of Orleans, and he took the title King of the French rather than the King of France. This solidified like a populist idea for his rule. His regime was called the bourgeoisie monarchy because the social base was the wealthy elite. And yeah, okay. His reign, they had the tricolour flag, they abolished censorship, you needed high property qualifications for voting. The rest of the population were disenfranchised. Louis Napoleon looks at the July monarchy as being illegitimate. He attempts to seize power from them twice. He failed uprising in Strasbourg in 1836. And in 1840, he tries again. He gets sentenced to life imprisonment, and yeah, he's imprisoned in Ham. And for the first 6 years, he actually immerses himself in study whilst he's learning and writing about poverty and how to solve it. He also engages himself in his uncle's favorite pastime, which is learning about Julius Caesar and writing about Julius Caesar. And he's drawing parallels between the successes of the Roman Republic and what was then France. Anyway, he escapes in 1846 and he goes to London. Now we have the collapse of the July monarchy in 1848. There's a series of political banquets and street protests, and it spirals into revolution, and it introduces the universal male suffrage. Louis Napoleon is utilized to win the presidency with 74% of the vote. And he rules until he launches a coup in 1851, which was an iconic date because of his uncle's coronation. A year later, he is crowned Emperor Napoleon III. And this is the Second Empire, when Napoleon III's interest in classics bloom even more. Like, not just Julius Caesar, because that's just basic stuff. Napoleon III, you know, he rebuilds France. There's a total reconstruction of Paris. You know, he's designing boulevards, advanced sewage system, aqueducts, and public parks. He's dismantling treaties like the one in 1815. You have the Crimean War, which France ally with Britain to defeat Russia, and that creates the Treaty of Paris. And Napoleon III is like the arbiter of Europe. By 1860, his regime is invincible. At the time, as we spoke about, there's still the Frankish kind of idea of Frenchness is still in the public imagination. Napoleon III needs a new myth for the French to focus on. And his goal is to drive the French from the Franks to the Gauls. The move to promote our ancestors, the Gauls, had a few factors, right? Napoleon III has already overthrown the Bourbon legacy, and he needs to change the wheel. The Gauls provide an ancestor that isn't dependent on the Franks. This Frankish identity was really problematic. Napoleon III needs a unique indigenous identity for France in order to continue his great leadership. In 1864, we see Napoleon III is starting to allow workers more rights, for example, the right to strike. And the Gallic narrative works very well for the working classes. It's Victor Duruy who puts education reform. We can see a more secular curriculum that highlights French history and science, and the Gallic obsession becomes an official state project. And this is the exciting part. We're talking about the archaeological crusade at Alesia. Napoleon III launches his most ambitious archaeological project in 1861 in Alesia. Napoleon III leads like a archaeology to prove that Burgundy was the site of the Battle of Alesia, and to prove the chieftain Vercingetorix. The digs were very unique. The emperor personally funded the excavations. He sends army officers to work, utilizing their ability to read Latin texts and topographical landscapes of war. There are 10 miles of trenches that need to be dug. 10 miles. And these are what Caesar had used to trap the Gauls. Thousands of coins, Roman weaponry is found, and they're even doing reconstructions of full-scale like fortifications and war machines. He invented living archaeology. All these reconstructions we have now are because of Napoleon III. 1865, it gets finished. The excavations had revealed the site. Well, he's created a monumental setting for his idea of Gallic identity. The statue of Vercingetorix in 1865 is erected. It's a huge landmark in France. The statue that's overlooking the battlefield of Alesia is nearly 22 feet, and the base features nationalist inscriptions. It's a really symbolic move. And the face of Vercingetorix is modeled on Napoleon III himself, so he was like, I want to be you. And yes, okay, some will say that this statue reflects the defeat of the French. It's more of a statue to show French resistance. In 1865, Napoleon III publishes the first volume of his book on Julius Caesar, and it's really, really well respected. 1865, it seems that Napoleon III peaked. There wasn't much good after that. In 1866, Napoleon III's health had deteriorated significantly, and he was unable to engage in details of the government. He had severe gallstones and gout, and he was bedridden. There was a Prussian victory over Austria in 1866 changed the power in Europe. France isolated. And Napoleon III is failing to acquire territory. Belgium, Luxembourg, he can't acquire territory. And his military reforms are blocked by the National Assembly. The final crisis was the Franco-Prussian War. And despite his awful health, Napoleon III declares war on Prussia. At the Battle of Sedan on September 2nd, 1870, Napoleon III is forced personally to surrender to the Prussians, and the Third Republic is proclaimed in Paris. Second Empire is gone. Napoleon III is held as a prisoner of war. In modern day, Napoleon III is held as a prisoner of war, and he goes into his final exile. And actually he has a nice little exile. I think he moves into like an English cottage. Napoleon III, he created this, he transformed French identity, and he improved archaeology. Whilst I can't comment for his policies on what it would have been like to be a peasant underneath him, which quite frankly, most of us would have if we were in that time, I can't do that. But anyway, thank you for watching this video, and yeah, I like reading your comments every morning, so send them over.